29th. It's the 29th. The 29th. I'm going to be your host tonight. My name is Dana Durnford. You might know me as the nuclearproctologist.org. Should TEPCO be removed from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site? And should there also be independent testing of the water tanks? That's probably one of the most important questions we'll ever have, because the tanks are empty. You can't let anybody double check them independently. You can't filter radioactive water because the filter is so hot. It's a lethal dose just running past it from 50 feet away after about 20 minutes of the water we're talking about. There's no longer water. This is liquid fuel, basically. It's poured over the reactor core itself, right? So it's absurd. If you put that in the tank, you got neutrons and gammas and x-rays and betas and everything else pulsing. You're going to start a chain reaction, burn a hole in the tank. And you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts. I don't know what that was. 1.4 million sieverts per tank. We counted the tanks. There's not 1,000 tanks there anymore. There's 750 tanks. Okay, so I'm just going to run through some quick headlines. The Japanese ambassador to the United States writes to the UN Secretary General, "It's no exaggeration to say the fate of Japan and the whole world depends on the number 4 reactor." The number 4 doesn't exist. So here you were with a major media pretending they're in the building to the left. So why are they doing something like that? That's quite risky, I would imagine. 1,000 years from now, the contaminated water from Fukushima may still be entering the Pacific Ocean. It's necessary to keep monitoring during that time. It tends to concentrate in the testicles. 360 atoms of radioactive sulfur per day may have been inhaled by Californians after Fukushima. 360 atoms per day tends to concentrate in the testicles. Well, what's the best way to sterilize somebody or animal or birds or insects is have lethal radiation. Nowhere to run hot radioactive particles in Seattle at 50% of the level seen in Tokyo. It's 250 kilometers to the other side of Tokyo, the south side. New York Times, California rainwater, 181 times above drinking water standards for the radioactive iodine-131. Canada's study was 220 million atoms, 131 per liter, sustained. And Ottawa, Canada's study was 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129 because there's a 31 ratio. And so you expect to see close to those numbers, right? And so there's, for every iodine-131 that's produced, the best way to think about it, and that's sulfur peroxide, hydrogen buckyballs in that one. This is sulfur too, 1,500 atoms of radioactive sulfur per meter. 40 million becquerels of iodine-131 in a single bed of kelp. So 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine-129s. And so the insects and animals and children in that, their thyroid glands are being saturated. And they're much more vulnerable than an adult, for instance, right? But if you look at the insects and birds and small mammals and animals, and then work your way, because you break in the food chain in multiple places. So when you start working your way up the food chain, at the rate, the numbers we're talking about, as you'll see, radioactive iodine-131 in Pennsylvania, they're like using, because you can find iodine-131, it's got 10 half-lives, and it's got, a short half-life, and so it's basically less than 100 days, the majority of it's gone. So it disarmed, that happened a couple of years ago, then I got nothing to worry about. But there's 1,000 other fission products at the same time. So at the site itself, just the exhaust stacks, these are, like there's the water towers, the big thick water towers, and then there's exhaust stacks. Now for an exhaust stack to be at over 10 sieverts per hour, then you would expect it to be emitting radioactive material. So where is that coming from? What is causing these stacks to be so incredibly radioactive? And the stacks they're talking about are these really tall stacks, and they're venting the radiation from the fuel pools and the incinerators typically, and they're incredibly radioactive. Fukushima Unit 1, and it can also vent the reactor. And they want the radiation to fall off. So they're always hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools. I just want to make sure that's out there. High radiation dose rates in area had measured over 10 sieverts per hour. Fukushima gives radioactive meters to pregnant women and children. Now the problem, they can't read it. That has to go to universities to study the large two-legged lab rats. Radiation and health specialists, children with over 11 becquerels a kilogram start to see heart problems. That was Chernobyl, because there's orphanages of disfigured children that are abandoned after Chernobyl. Even today, many orphanages of disfigured and abandoned children from just because there's all kinds of, there's 1,800 diseases, but when you get congenital malformation with the children, senior scientists, irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram of cesium, 50 becquerels a kilogram of cesium. And cesium-137 immediately damages the heart muscles. They're not slow acting. Extreme increase of mortality after Fukushima. Extreme increase of mortality. I'm going to play you a clip, a very short clip. And it's a press club meeting. And these people are the apologists for the nuclear industries. And so the guy on your right is from, I think it's Berkeley University. The Japanese guy alongside of him is TEPCO apologist. And then there's Miles O'Brien, the one-armed bandit. There's what's her face from the nuclear industry that's, was she with the IAEA? it's Nuclear Regulatory Agency, I believe, actually, United States. Kathleen Higley's at the podium. And I can't remember the other guy. But she's going to talk about how it's the same apologist on all the different agencies. And this is how they control the narrative. And I like to play it sometimes just to remind everybody how the world actually works.
When I was trying to pull this talk together.
My apologies, it was a bit loud.
When I was trying to pull this talk together, not only will I sort of get a little philosophical about the impacts and the like and try to put things in context, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about who are these radiation experts that get trotted out in events like this, or that get to participate in various activities and analysis to make pronouncements about is something safe or not safe. And if you look, you'll see organizations that are often represented. The ICRP, International Commission on Radiological Protection, a premier organization. You'll see UNSCEAR and IRPA. So UNSCEAR is the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation. IRPA, the International Radiation Protection Association. The IAEA and some of its folks, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Our own US NCRP. And then there are a number of other organizations. So there's PAHO, there's the Health Physics Society, there's World Health Organization. All of these will bring in, as necessary, experts to speak to you on issues related to radiation protection, radiation safety, and impacts. But if you go a little deeper and you start looking at these organizations, the ICRP, for example, very well known. It's been operating nearly 100 years, not quite. Main commission, 10 people. It's got 5 standing committees. So it's 100-ish folks. I lead one of the 5 committees. If you look at the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation that looked at the effects from Chernobyl, from Fukushima, from other areas, and that has about 30, roughly, countries that are represented in that group. If you start teasing through these pictures, you're going to see the same people on every one of those organizations. So the same people from ICRP are on UNSCEAR, they're in IRPA. If you look at the NCRP, again, the US organization that advises the country on radiation protection issues, it's 100 people, a lot of gray-haired 100 people. And most of them are part of UNSCEAR, are part of IRPA, are part of ICRP, participate in IAEA. So the result, or the real world, is that there's not that many folks that really do radiation safety, radionuclide transport, dose calculations, all of this in the world. It's a pretty small club. And we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more, but Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA, and so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us. So
there are a bunch of serial killers, every one of them on that stage, and their job is to get on TV and in the media and be quoted on Twitter and everywhere else that everything is good. Go back to sleep. So nobody died at Fukushima except for...
when I was trying to pull...
Sorry, except for... In a single month, there was an extra 12,700 people died. And now, that was an abnormality. And that's quite the abnormality. And cancer shots skyrocketed, cardiac disease skyrocketed. And there was an extra 12,700 people that dropped dead. There was one street where 7 people dropped dead on the one street in a single year. There was 865,000 extra cancers in 2012. That's not the button, Dana. Keep with the program, dude. Okay, we're almost through this. So normally I do the videos at the end of the show. I'm going to do the videos after the end of this. I'll explain that in a moment. Radioactive material from the nuclear reactor is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So you might think, well, the human is pretty resilient, Dana. And it's true, I'm not denying that. But the insects and the birds and the mammals and the animals and the fungus and the bacteria is not. They're unbelievably vulnerable. And you can't have a future, your children can't have a future and nuclear at the same time, it turns out. Radioactive xenon-133, which burns a hole through your lung, ends up in your bone and wrecks your chromosomes and your DNA and your stem cells. And for children, it mutates their stem cells because they have the most stem cells, they're the most vulnerable, right? And so there's 1,800 diseases for birds and insects too. It's not just humans, but it includes humans. And persisted for weeks at huge numbers. In fact, this was one of the models of the xenon. This was based on 20 days after. It's a continuous plume. So it eventually covers the whole planet. Do you get it? Fukushima will start burning radioactive waste, 100,000 becquerels a kilogram to be incinerated. With over 1 billion pounds of debris just in the exclusion zone, they consider acceptable to burn because it's radioactive, because that's normal everywhere, or only in Japan. Nobody else on the planet does something like that. That's terrorism, right? You know why? Because it ends up covering the planet in 27 days. Japan burning Fukushima debris 10 miles from the Daiichi plant. They got 2 incinerators now at the plant, by the way. Hundreds ill after Fukushima nuclear plant rubble burned in a major city. It's shipping it all over the country and burning it in the local incinerators. This is called terrorism, by the way. Hundreds ill after Fukushima nuclear plant rubble burned in major Japanese cities, suffering nosebleeds, problems with eyes, throats, and skin. And despicable apologists, like I showed you earlier in that video, claiming everything is safe. Radioactive iodine-131 in the rainwater samples near San Francisco. You can't just have iodine-131 and these are extraordinary, 18,000% above the federal standards, which are unacceptable. Even, like, the NRC acknowledges there is no safe limits. And so does many, many, many experts. And so at 131 in the rainwater samples, you remember the whole country got... So you've seen sulfur, and this one is iodine. You've seen that multiple times. This is cesium-137 at 1 million times normal. There is no normal. There's weapons fallout and all the accidents and satellites explosion and everything else, but it's man-made. It never goes away. It just keeps bioaccumulating. Radiation levels in the U.S. West Coast spiked over 1 million times normal. It's actually, this is just a short period on that map, and it's up to 10 million becquerels a cubic meter of air. So water going into the ocean just from one acknowledgement was a sievert per hour. If it's coming in contact with the massive fuel pool meltdowns and reactor core meltdowns, it's unprecedented meltdown in human history. There's nothing, you can't compare anything to Fukushima. You've got 4 massive plants that have 2 fuel pools at the top of them also, which has decades of reactor cores that are still boiling 120,000 liters of water a day each. And it's split because it's splitting atoms, so the water is saturated. These are constant dirty bombs. And the industry knew what it was doing. That's why they built most of the nuclear power plants in farmland, because people like supermarkets. TEPCO done nothing for over 2 years to stop the highly radioactive Fukushima leak, water above 1 sievert per hour. It's hard to comprehend how much we're actually talking about. But remember, at the same time, the whole planet was being buried in radioactive fallout. That's 28 days later in the bottom of radioactive fallout. That's reactor 3. It's no longer on the ground, it's gone airborne, right? Map shows Fukushima fallout in the U.S. Radiation doses in the Northeast and the Great Lakes are equal to the West Coast. Well, the model shows it covers the whole planet. But they're acknowledging it along the way is what I'm showing you. Different people acknowledging it. And we can take you way down that rabbit hole. And so where does most of it go? It washes down to your coastlines. And so your tidal zones are the most vulnerable areas. And we'll get to that in 1, 2, 3 more. Neptunium-239 dispersion over North America, which decays to plutonium-239. And that model is based on 26 days, I believe. It's a continuous plume covering the planet. It's still coming out today. It never goes away. It decays to different isotopes. It does that 10 times. It basically never goes away. It attacks everything with replicating cells. And nothing has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So this was 22 days later, April the 1st. To your right and to your left was the 31st of March. That was 20 days later to your left. So the plume is unbelievable. And the slower you spread radiation dose, more effectively it produces cancer. And so it's 1,800 diseases. So heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. And when the thyroid is saturated, you're producing radioactive hormones, and you're producing anthropogenic man-made radioactive hormones. So this is one great big cluster. Oomph. This is April the 10th, 11th, 12th. So that's 30 days later. But if you rewind to, say, day, let me see, this is really interesting. This is day 9. This is France's model. And this is important for the videos I'm going to show here in a second from today. So this is Alaska all the way down the eastern seaboard, right? And we're currently right here, right today. Now, I've done research expeditions from Vancouver to Alaska 6 different years in a row. And the pictures of the species left on the... Now, I dove that coastline as a commercial diver also. So I'm not naive or gullible. Okay, so this is day 9 of radioactive fallout. Let's move up to 2 weeks. There we go, one more. Or one more, right there. So that's 2 weeks later, radioactive fallout. And almost all the models, right, that's the consensus. So when you get up to day 20, this is the 30th of April, or March, so that's day 20. It's a continuous plume. So appreciate it. Think of an invisible snowstorm, or a snowstorm. And the snow never melts, never goes away. And the snow pulses cold every second at the speed of light for millions of years. And it never goes away. But now flip that. It's invisible. You can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or taste it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. And it's pulsing energy, which you can't get rid of, which is pure energy at long distances in every direction, symmetrically like an explosion, literally an explosion going off, a nuclear bomb detonation every second at the speed of light, almost the speed of light. So you got betas and alphas and gammas and neutrons. Okay, and so when they're pulsing at the speed of light and they bounce off each other, they don't mingle. And what that means is, think of something going almost at the speed of light, hitting something else and then changing direction. And the phenomenon is known as a braking effect, where you're hitting the brakes for a billionth of a second or something. And that creates like a spark. Let's think of it that way. So each one of them is going to create a spark. So imagine you have billions of them, like we're seeing in your plume, bouncing off each other. That creates what we call an X-ray. These X-rays, in this kind of quantity, like in just a small plume going through eco reserve or something like that, is giving a full body X-ray to all the species. It's hard to come back from that. That's a long, slow, painful demise because you damaged all the cells, you damaged the immune system, you compromised it. Okay. So this is true for all the species. Now, after Chernobyl, there was a lot of studies coming out pointing a finger saying that Fukushima changed the sex ratio of males and females in Europe. Now remember, they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom after Fukushima. They closed all the freshwater fishing in Switzerland, for instance, for 30 years, after Chernobyl. And the same thing with the United Kingdom was after Chernobyl. 9,400 farms closed because of radioactive fallout. So that means your water's contaminated. Your schools, all your houses, everything is contaminated. Your entire food source is contaminated, no matter what. So they should have abandoned, because they acknowledged it by closing 9,400 farms, they should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, and United Kingdom in 1986. And Chernobyl's bad, but it's just a paper towel compared to Fukushima. And Chernobyl's bad. Go look at my presentations. But look at my video, what Netflix didn't tell you about Chernobyl. And I think I've run you through 900 studies. So you can see all these different facets of how nuclear wrecks the ecosystem and all your defenses and mechanisms. And once you compromise the immune system, you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign, right? I'm just saying. Okay. Bear with me. We're almost there. All right, there I am. So instead of playing the videos at the beginning and at the end, I'm going to play them at the beginning. Now remember, everything you're looking at was brand new when I started doing research expeditions to Alaska. I know what it looks right now. It looks like a disaster. But everything you're seeing was brand new. I built everything on the boat. The boat was just a shell, right? I built all the infrastructure, all the equipment. I built everything. Just remember that, because I know it's hard to appreciate when you look at it. But remember, I done all the wiring. That's why it's a disaster. That never broke all those years until now. But here's the reason.
Well, that's really bad looking. See the black wires?
Oh, I forgot to click the autoplay. So I took the tape off. Remember the smoke I showed you in the last video last night? So when I took it apart, that's what I forgot to fix it and solder everything. And then seal it with plastic dip, right? And I paid the price for it. Okay, let's get started here.
I'll use nuts.
I'll use nuts
and I'm going to put new ones on it. and solder, I think. Because that's an old cable. I'll do that for a backup, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, that cable is rotten. It's rotten. Whenever you see the metal turn that color, that's pretty rotten. So we bolted together. We got some little bit of solder. I'll get some of that plastic dip and coat it. But I'm gonna actually have to replace this cable. It's like a 16-foot. I think it's a number 4 gauge. Let's try the motor. Let's try the motor. I'm going to wrap it up in tape. I'm pretty sure that's going to work because it's rotten. Or maybe actually I'll just wait, I suppose. Let's give it a try. Okay, we're going to try it. Let's see. First off, we can tilt the motor down so we can get the cover back on it. That'll be pretty cool. If the motor goes down, the power comes on, then that'll be good enough for now. The big moment where the lights come on. Oh, baby. Tell me more. Down goes the motor. Yeah. Oh. We'll go up. Up. Motor goes down. Motor goes up. Motor goes down. That sounds better, too. And it turns over. It's a little windy today. I want to take the boat down and stick it in the water now and give it a try, but I'll go check the forecast first and see which way the wind is blowing. First thing, let's put this cover back on because that was a disaster. Yay, what a day. Okay, so we got to disconnect this one. Disconnect this, put all this back together, put the cover on it, pressurize it and give it a try, I guess. Okay, let's try it again. Let's try it again. That's a good sound. Wow. Wasn't expecting that. Close enough. That actually sounded good too. Alright, we're back again. Tide is still coming up a little bit. I'm going to put her in the water. Just keep our fingers crossed. So the kicker is running, the big one's running. Sounds good. And the little piece that mounts right there, I broke it off. It's supposed to connect those two right there.
It broke off in the storm.
That broke off, that piece. I gotta go to a machine shop or something and see if they can make one for me. You know what's crazy is there's not a single bird in the water anywhere. Not one. And we got the biggest migratory path on the entire planet, and there's not a single friggin' bird anywhere. And there's not a single bird, nothing. Not a single bird.
That's 3 times, Dana.
And the biggest migratory, Newfoundland is the biggest migratory path on the entire planet. It's around 45 million migratory birds a year come through here, and we're right at the tip. We're right out on the Avalon Peninsula. We're the most easterly point in Canada, and we can't see a fucking bird. Excuse the language, not a single bird. I can't even wrap my mind around it. I can't actually wrap my mind around that statement. Let's try it again. Now it's doing it again. That sucks. Let's head back. So much for that theory. What the hell is going on? Sheesh. It won't even let me get to 2,000 RPM now.
That's disappointing. Oh well, a couple of minutes of euphoria was pretty cool. That was a good adrenaline rush. Now it's back to reality. So much for that theory. Pretty disappointing, eh? What you didn't see, I accidentally shot in slow motion, so it's pointless to show you, was it opened up to 5,500 RPM. I was like, woohoo! This is amazing. We're back to normal. So I drove out at 55 kilometers an hour. It was against the wind. So anyway, I'm looking for birds right away, slow down. And then when I tried it, I had the camera running. And you've seen it yourself, the boat all of a sudden gave up the ghost. So a few minutes later, it would run almost at 3,000 RPM. So if it didn't go, which is a typical restriction, if I was low on oil, that's what it would do. I changed the oil, I changed the leg oil. But there's another filter there, I'll check it tomorrow. We changed the oil filter, that's all brand new. That's the first run on those filters, the first run on the oil, the first run on the leg oil. It's got a brand new prop on it. And now there's something going on there. Now, I disconnected the second tilt switch, but I said I'll play it because there's more chance somebody else might figure it out or make a good suggestion, and that might turn out to be what it is. I'll have to get the mechanic to come down and get on it and go out. But there was no... there was no birds. There was some in the community, but as soon as you got out there, there was no birds. Like, because you expect to see groups of 5, 10, 50, 500, whatever, right? But, so if you don't see that, then at least expect to see, one here, 2 over there, 3 over here, none. So if you don't see that, then you expect to see at least one there, way in the distance, at least another one there, right? Nothing. And so anyway, at the same time, a friend of mine called from British Columbia, and he grows, Roger. Remember Roger? I think he's 72 now. And the first thing he said to me, I never asked nothing. He called, I said, hey, how's it going? He said, there's no insects. And I said, what? Because it caught me off guard. He said, there's no insects, Dana. He said, well, I'm used to certain insects in the garden. Now, he's been, he had the mussel farm out there on the BC Islands, and he had a second house out there with a bed and breakfast. The only way to get there is by speedboat, right? But these are stunning places, right? And he retired when he was 65. That was my best friend out there, right? And his whole house used to be a beautiful lawn. He tore it up when he retired because he has a couple of acres out there. He always farmed for 30 years. And now, so each year, because he's in BC, it's earlier spring, early summer, and his basement, he does a whole lot of growing the seedlings. But he said, yeah, there's no insects out there. So there's a gas separator on that engine that I haven't cleaned in the last couple of years. So we'll check that. And there's an air filter. I'll check that. In fact, I haven't changed the air filter on that engine for 4 years, 5 years or something. Oops. So it could be. We'll keep our fingers crossed and hope it's that. I'm going to go back out because the engine, it runs perfect. It has a restrictor. What you were seeing was the restrictor. So there might be another option where I can disconnect the monitoring system because it's a sending unit or something is acting up. Because I ran out at full speed, right? That was full speed. There was never a single bucking. And when I slowed right down, the idle light blinked once. So if anybody knows, there was no, because normally they give you like blinks, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, or something like that. And that's a code. It'll keep doing that over and over and over, this pattern. And you can look it up and figure it out, right? Like we done with the idler control valves, right? That's how we figured out what that was. And because I took it off originally, cleaned it in diesel, and rinsed it in gas and put it back in. It worked a lot better, but it wouldn't idle proper. It was a lot better than it was. Okay. IAEA team in Japan for final review before they walk away and let TEPCO, a corporation that is responsible for genocide, omnicide against the whole planet. They're a corporation because nobody can be held accountable. You can't put a corporation in jail, right? And so this way you don't blame the nuclear industry. Well, it wasn't us, it was TEPCO. Should TEPCO be removed from Fukushima nuclear meltdown? Yes, all the universities should be out there working. And independent testing of water tanks. And everybody who's in the know would automatically agree with that statement that the business that makes it still can't contain it, so they shouldn't be able to make it, right? And the universities that promote it, the schools of mass destruction, have never went there. No nuclear scientist has ever went there. No nuclear academics have ever went there until South Korea. And they had a predetermined outcome for that because they're trying to promote nuclear in their own country. And they had politicians, the opposition, go down there 2 weeks ago, 3, 4 weeks ago, and nobody would talk to them. TEPCO wouldn't talk to them. The Japanese government wouldn't talk to them. They weren't allowed on TEPCO's site. The people in the communities wouldn't talk to them. And they came back empty-handed, and all of a sudden now they let 20 nuclear scientists that have covered up Fukushima, because we'd got whole presentations on South Korea followed. And guess who that story's by? Look at that. Mari Yamaguchi. It's amazing how often she turns up in that for the major cover story. But think about it, because the final review before they dump the water into the ocean, but they're not dumping anything in the ocean. If you fill up the tanks at 2.2 sieverts per hour, which is what we're talking about, because you can't filter it. There was no filter. The Siri system, the Reva system, the Alps system didn't exist. And I'll show it to you, because otherwise I'm a liar. He's lying. Stop lying, Dana. Why didn't he show it to you? He shows you everything else. Because he's a liar. I'm headed back out on the ocean tomorrow because the engine's working good enough to get a base count. We have to do it over and over and over and over to quantify it, right? Because we're at the migratory. This is peak, from here till the end of summer is peak migratory. There's around 45 million seabirds, saltwater birds, would come through this province. We're the most easterly point of Canada. Think about that statement. We're out on an island in the Atlantic, and you don't have a bird in sight out when you get out on the ocean. We need to find out how many species are coming through. Now, we know on previous expeditions over the last couple of years on this coast. Okay, let me get back to this. Because it's hard. It's hard to love a man whose penis is bent and paralyzed. Remember that song? Ruby, I'm constipated. Go and crap somewhere. Shadows on the walls tells me you're about to slam the door. Oh, Ruby. For F's sake, slam the door. She painted up her face and curled her pubic hair. You ever heard that one, folks? That's a campfire song down here. That's why most people learn to play a guitar so they can sing shit like that. Down here. TEPCO to abandon the REVA system. Now, they abandoned it. This was 2014 in August. This is 3.5 years later. The REVA system is the same as the ALP system. 3.5 years later, it was unused. Think of that statement. TEPCO in 2014 can't bring the water issues under control of Fukushima Daiichi. You know why? Because it has yet to function, just like the REVA system and just like the Suri system, the water filtration systems. See, you need 4 feet thick lead suits or lead wall to protect you from this stuff. You can't wear a 4 foot thick lead suit because you can't. So why did they build an ice wall? Because, I don't know. I can't answer that question. Why didn't you build a real wall? Why you gotta be such screw-ups down there? So therefore, TEPCO, the most incompetent corporation in human history, should TEPCO be removed from Earth, is what I should have put it. I would have like 100 votes right now. Should TEPCO be removed from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site? Well, they're not decommissioned authorities. They don't know what they're doing. They're a corporation on the stock market. And you're going to let them determine the outcome of humanity and the 8 million species? Have you guys lost your minds? And so whenever you see Mari Yamaguchi, she's that's 2023, right? Is that IAEA's assistant ensuring the release meets the international standards and safety to gain the understanding of other countries? Forget it, without no you're talking about all these countries got to be put people in key positions to acquiesce so there won't be any debate or referendums. The release should be delayed, said one professor. Water used to cool the reactor fuel in about 1,000 tanks. So that's such an important statement. Actually, that's the most important statement. Okay, hang on. It'll make sense. Let's do this one more time. And the problem with the story is you can't rush the story. It's pretty frustrating. You just got to take your time and be methodical and tell the story. What did I do that time? Try this again. Oh, I went the wrong direction. Here we go. I'll get there. Right here. You're dear, Dana. Stop whining. There we go. I think I got it. Yeah, they should build ice walls around forest fires, James says. It's hilarious. So this is today's headline, Mari Yamaguchi. And she's talking about 1,000 tanks, right, that they use to cool the reactors. And the third line from the bottom. Okay. Let's go back to 2013. How about that? That was a pretty good year. 2019. Did I screw that up or what? I did. Let's try that again. I'll get there someday. It's not too late for me. I can do better. It's a joke. Okay, here we go. How the hell did I screw that up? I wonder. Okay. So 2013. Mari Yamaguchi. 2013. 1,000 steel tanks. 2014. Mari Yamaguchi. Stored in 1,200 tanks. 2017. November. Associated Press, 1,000 tanks. 2019, 900 tanks, I think it is. No, 1,000 tanks. 2021, you guessed it. Associated Press, that would be Mari Yamaguchi again. Stored in 1,000 tanks. And 2023, Mari Yamaguchi again. So that's her all the way from 2013 setting the precedents. And Associated Press has around 1,800 sites, medias, and they all post the same story with the same picture by the same author at the same time worldwide. It's a pretty slick way to cause a whole lot of brainwashing. Japan's series on Fukushima nuclear disaster is so enthralling account of the 2011 event with strong hints of HBO's Chernobyl, which was the same one they played on Netflix, right? So, but HBO originally ran it. Netflix got to use it later. So now they're going to put up their version of Fukushima, and they always do this in every single story. It'll be this disclaimer, basically, caused by the earthquake and the tsunami. Well, it doesn't matter what caused it, it happened. And so the tanks, by the way, are empty, in case you didn't know it. Because the reactors are not there in the first place, right? They blew up. Don't forget that part. I didn't show you the buildings tonight, did I? Well, I showed you reactor 4, I'm sure. How about reactor 3 and reactor 4? So if there's no fuel pools, then there can't be any reactor cores either. And the buildings are supposed to be 190 feet tall. There's only stumps of them left. And the picture on your right is 2012, early 2013. And the reactor core is at the very top of the buildings. And so there's 2 pools at the top of each building. They're hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. There's no containment. They're in the pools, so-called pools, because they're hot. They like to call them ponds. That's a better way of deceiving you. Oh, it's a pond. That's pretty cool. No, it's a lethal pond. You swim in it, you die. And it's splitting the atoms, all the decades of fuel, and they're stuffed. Fukushima reactors were stuffed with fuel rods, right? So this 8-episode series for Netflix triggers the most serious nuclear accident since Chernobyl. So this makes Chernobyl, unfortunately, look like a paper towel. And Chernobyl ain't no paper towel, don't get me wrong. I've done multiple hour presentations on it for many, many years. And Chernobyl is not a cakewalk. It's catastrophic. And when you change the sex ratio of everybody in Europe, for instance, like Chernobyl's alleged to have done with the academic studies that we produced in presentations and suggesting strongly, and what they mean is more females being born, or more males being born than females. And so that's true. That's going to be true for all species, not just human jig, right? This is true for all species, which means less species each time. And generational, then what you're doing is you're sterilizing them, right? Best-selling book, On the Brink, The Inside Story of Fukushima Daiichi. First published immediately in 2012. There was 865,000 extra cancers in 2012. A film that was generally well received. Now, this was pure propaganda. The truth has never, ever come out, except for the endless presentations. Yeah, and there's a river that Fukushima Daiichi was built on a river. And they brought in all kinds of shale and crushed rocks and boulders and everything, and he built the site up. And so the river runs out. They do this almost all nuclear power plants will have this kind of engineering if they can do it, because there's a mountain in the background, right? So the water runs underneath it too. It also runs down through the water tables, down through the natural curvatures and everything of the mountainside, which runs right through the plant, washes radiation out into the Pacific. That's designed. They spent $500 million to lay down the foundation of the site. $500 million. And everything gets flushed out, so the whole country is covered also in radioactive fallout. So every time you have a typhoon or a cyclone, they have cyclones rather? I can't remember sometimes. That's important. James was talking about the plumbing system to fill the tanks. It would be so, by the way, that would be so radioactive, you can't step over the plumbing system if you're actually transporting the numbers that we're talking about. I'll just give you is there such thing as a quick boo? Well, there is. There's where you just tell a little chunk of the pie. That's what we're going to do right here. That's what we're doing right there. Here we go, left, right. Where did I put that stuff? What? Right there. That'll work. The whole story's crazy. We count the site, there's only 750 tanks, by the way. At 2 sieverts per hour, if that's going through the pipes, right, then you can't step over the pipes because you're talking about dozens of sieverts no matter where you stood up. That's a lethal dose. Your organs start melting right away. They won't, even if you get jacked up in a helicopter and taken away, your organs will continue to melt. And you've seen this after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where the people that didn't get tossed 600 feet into the air and got huge doses of radiation instead would squat down and die. And what they were doing were excreting their organs, right? Because their organs melted from the neutron bombardment of the detonation from a distance instead of blast. It's just holy shit, man. So people were tossed 600 feet into the air, and horses and pets and kids. It's getting pretty graphic. Just talk like what it really is. When a nuclear bomb goes off, if you're close, if you're not too close, if you don't get incinerated, you could easily get tossed 600, 800 feet up in the air. And this is what you see in a lot of horses and animals and people, because back then they were still using horses a lot, right? And they all had a lot of A lot of people kept their own cows and goats and stuff like that because you didn't have that many supermarkets back in those days, right? Like you do now, you got a 7-Eleven on every corner. So 2 sieverts an hour, you put that in the tank, we're only acknowledging beta, is 1.4 million sieverts. You can't build another tank. And the problem, there's a lot of problems with the ice wall. So if you're building an ice wall, the radiation is not going to wait for you to finish your job. It's going to continue to hemorrhage out, right? So people would have been dropping dead. They would have said, well, I'm not feeling good, and then they would have got their ticket out of there. They would have died later and would have got blamed on other things, right? And die a week later, die a month later. They were using a lot of temporary workers. They went through 260,000 people. And if you gave them $1,031 each and don't build a wall, then you used up all the money that you had to build a wall. So basically 260,000 people made less than $1,000 and they got the wall for free. Right? It doesn't add up, does it? Why would you build an ice wall instead of a real wall? You're going to spend $9 or $12 million a year to keep the maintenance on that. What happens if the power goes out and it melts down? Well, the problem with the ice wall too is that the neutrons will reflect off the wall because whatever's running downhill. The top part of the wall is meant to stop water from coming into the site from the mountain and going around it. But they also, like I showed you earlier, wanted to pump it or divert it and pump it out to the ocean. That failed. They want to build a fence to stop the radiation from going in the ocean. They didn't even try to do it because and if you build a wall, you're going to call liquefaction, where the ground, right, can't get rid of its load from typhoons and rainfall and everything else. So, but you're concentrating radiation in on top of that. So anybody that's trying to work around the reactors are getting brutal doses, whole body x-rays. The sky used to light up down there all the time because of the hydrogen caused by and other noble gases would cause little detonations, right? The site disappeared for a couple of years, basically out of the conversation because people had to run away from the site because the earth was cracked, we know, in 6 places where the radiation was over 10 sieverts per hour in the steam that was coming up from the China syndrome. The tanks were all built at the same time. If you fill a tank up with just beta, 2 sieverts per hour, for instance, that's 1.4 million sieverts of just beta. You can't just have beta. You can't filter this stuff, even at that number. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. 1.4 million sieverts means you can't build another tank. And if you count those small tanks, and I did, we've been covering this for years, then it works out to 750 tanks. Because I counted each of those small tanks as individual tanks, even though they're nothing compared to the big ones, right? And so I was still being... So we kind of jumped the shark there for a second. A year on, restricted licenses for elderly drivers rarely used in Fukushima because they're getting so radioactive because they're displacing all the red blood cells with white blood cells, right? Which means you're getting rid of oxygen and nutrition, so you're making irrational decisions. And so the elderly in Fukushima and Koriyama City, yeah, which both of them are supposed to be evacuated. These are hideous numbers. Maybe I can find them for you. Maybe I can be useful for a second and do something, find something. Can't find any birds. That's got me freaked out today. We're right in the migratory season. We know from our trips down the Baccaloo, where there's supposed to be 6 million storm petrels. Right, we got, 3 trips out there. And that's the biggest breeding colony on the planet, the storm petrels. I'm going to head out again tomorrow. I'm probably going to put the little Zodiac in the water too. And so what we discovered on the West Coast was the species are missing. These are before and after pictures. Now remember, we done the whole coastline year after year after year. And so the species to the left now are exterminated on the Pacific. And we're seeing similar on the East Coast where you go into you won't see birds feeding in the tide zones here. And they're feeding at McDonald's. Birds like seafood, see? They don't like McDonald's. They're at McDonald's because they're desperate. And so normally you would see all kinds of shells on the side of the road. And because seabirds at low tide will pick up whelks and snails and mollusks and mussels and sea urchins and everything and whatever, clams, and drop them on the pavement and the sidewalks to crack them open, right? And they've been doing that. I've been teaching each other to do it since we've been building sidewalks and roads. And so normally you would always find shells. You would always see them at low tide, and they bring stuff up and drop it on the road. And you try not to, sometimes they're very aggressive doing it. Okay, so there's no shells on the side of the road down here. And the beaches in BC, I don't know if I got any good examples in these pictures, but these species are gone. Like those, because there's 27,000 islands in British Columbia. And I used to go 3, 4, 5 months at a time without coming home, trying to document the species, which the government hated. They really hated me doing it. But I might use put the little boat in the water because it's so cheap on gas. It takes off the wear and tear on the big boat too, right? That's a typical day on the research expeditions. Hard times. Very difficult times indeed. Let's keep going. So the weather looks good tomorrow. I'm going to head out again tomorrow. Spend 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 hours. I got a show packaged up for tomorrow night anyway. Or we might just do a marine show tomorrow night too where we're at. Now the problem here is it's really difficult to find a wharf where you can launch at low tide. Low tide, a lot of places you can't get the boat in the water here. You got to wait for the tide to come up quite a ways. A couple hours to 2 hours, 2.5 hours before you can launch the boat out. So you catch the tide coming up, catch slack tide, catch the tide falling for a couple of hours. But if you stay any longer, then you got to wait for the next tide to get the boat out of the water. This is fucking madness. Excuse the language. But I'm still freaked out. No birds out on the boat. I feel comfortable enough to keep taking the boat out like it is. It's just you can't go long distances. But that don't mean we can't get work done. We got to get work done. We got to get a baseline, right? And we got to count the species if we can find any. There's no whales, no porpoise, no dolphins, no otters, no minks. Fundamental solution to Fukushima contaminated water atomic stabilizer. I was like, okay. By Lee. Today, the contaminated water problem in Fukushima is challenging the field of science. That's a really good point, right? The whole world's like, I don't know what to do. Well, let TEPCO figure it out. It's their problem. But it's not. It's the 8 million species and the future of humanity is at stake. Fukushima's been pumping in 180 tons of water daily for 12 years. It's the perfect genocide weapon, right? It's a perfect omnicide weapon because it happens in increments over decades. But at some point, we're going to try to stop Fukushima because we got no choice. It's right on the ocean, but it's also hemorrhaging into the environment. Yeah. Fukushima has been pumping in 180 tons of water daily for 12 years. Now, 180 tons, a garden hose is 140 tons a day at 30 psi, a typical 3/8 garden hose. So they're saying multiple melted reactors, and they're pumping in the equivalent of splitting the garden hose 4 ways and pumping it in on the nuclear meltdowns. That's what they're saying, see? And they're claiming they suck all of that back up, goes through a filtration system, and then what's left over is filtered, but to keep everybody happy, they're going to put it in the tank. Well, the reactors normally use 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. A single reactor typically would fill up all the tanks, the 1,000 tanks they got, 6 times a day. Does that make too much sense or something? To cool the reactor core so he knows nothing. Not only that, I don't know why he wrote the article. Damaged. Did anybody bother showing him what a picture of it looks like? How do you call that damaged? He's damaged. But in 2000, and again they gotta have an excuse. Like, it doesn't matter why it happened. It happens. That's what really matters. And it matters more than you can imagine. Like pointing fingers, saying that, if this didn't happen, that didn't happen, nuclear would be pretty cool. Well, nuclear was never cool. The fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And long after the plant is closed, even when it's in cast, they're typically vented. So 1.3 million tons, you can fill up the tank 6 times a day on a normal reactor. And yet the scientific community is not provided, but now they've got a garden hose split 4 ways. That's what they've been spraying for. Like, this is, like, you got to get rid of TEPCO because you can't have a future with this ecological disaster that is unprecedented in scope and size. Should TEPCO be removed from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site and independent testing of the water tanks? The problem with the independent testing, they've never allowed anybody to go there and independent do anything. You can't bring a camera there. TEPCO takes the pictures and you can have it on a memory card and be happy with that. And continues to debate the risk of discharging the spent water. There's not spent water. Like, what the frig are you talking about? Into the ocean, whether it should be labeled as contaminated or treated. He's talking about how the scientific community is divided over just simply labeling it as some academics in South Korea recently alluded that it was contaminated, which was extraordinary. When there's no way it can't be contaminated. And there's no reason you can't store it somewhere. Right? Well, the reason is you can't keep telling the lie. So you got to end the lie. And even then you can't end the lie. And the reality of it is you're producing it constantly for hundreds, if not thousands of years there. You can't recover the fuel. You can pretend you did, like they done. Right? They pretend that they got the fuel out of the pool, but none of them was in the fuel pool till you left because it doesn't exist. So how are you going to have a debate when they're doing shit like that? Well, you're not. Let's move on. Cesium-rich microparticles, which is CsMPs, as right the acronym for that is. And that's because you're going to see that over and over in a second. Cesium-rich, which is cesium-rich microparticles, particles, found near Fukushima school a couple of miles away, which would have been Fukushima or Kuma. Documented the presence of large amounts of highly radioactive, poorly solutable cesium-rich microparticles, cesium, MPE microparticles with an S, is abandoned school buildings close to Fukushima. They got a weird way of framing their narrative for some reason, but let's do it anyway. You notice the windows are broken there. Well, let's go to the big shot zoom. Figure it out on our own, right? Where'd I go? Don't worry, Dana. Your big head is right there. Everybody can see you perfect. Ooh, ooh. So that curtain is, I can't tell if that curtain is outside or not. That could be a reflection, could it? No, it looks like that curtain is hanging out the window. I can't tell. So this is abandoned for 12 years, school. Because it's like a banana, right? So anything like a banana, you got to run away and leave it there for 12 years at least, or 12,000 years in this case. The microparticles penetrated the building. Penetrated the building. Well, the building has to breathe anyway, but what a weird way to frame it, right? Could pose a threat to the human health if inhaled, the study shows that indoor cesium microparticles should be considered in safety assessments and in building cleanup efforts in a nuclear wasteland surrounded by nuclear wastelands. The study involves scientists from Finland, Japan, France, University of Stanford, Stanford, and graduate students, whoopie-doo, the test dummies, Department of Chemistry, Kyushu University. So there's a lot. Very unusual for them to admit to anything, by the way. In recent years, the teams have showed a significant amount of cesium-rich particles, microparticles, were released from the damaged. Well, like, you can call it damaged. I'm going to call it long gone. It's gone. It's like gone. It's like gone. Do you get it? Does it look like it's gone to anybody? Does it look like it's damaged? Does it look like it's gone? Potatoes. The radioactive cesium content of cesium microparticles is much higher than other forms. These are what they call hot particles from the damaged, again, I hate that word. It's a very dishonest word, but they're only acknowledged in Unit 1, 2, 3. So apparently, Reactor 4 never happened. And that's what they're claiming. They're claiming that building never blew up and got destroyed. They're claiming it looks like this, and they got all the fuel out of the pool. And everywhere you go worldwide, this is what they're going to tell you, but they're both the official pictures, so I'm confused. Does everything look normal, or is it just me? Am I colorblind and I can't tell the difference? I don't know. It could be. Probably is. Following release from the damaged, again, how can you call it damaged? Widely distributed in the exclusion zone. My goodness, some Some hard to have a conversation with these people. Why are you so hard to have a conversation with, Mr. Nuclears? Containing air masses passed over Tokyo and America and Canada and Iceland and Greenland and Europe and right around the planet, and a continuous plume. You can't see it or smell it or hear it or feel it or touch it. But dirty word acknowledging it and dirty word denying it. That's got to be one of the stupidest pictures this year so far. Biden endorses jet training for Ukrainians on the F-16, I think it is. Look at it. Look at the zombies, actual zombies. There's some serious evil right there in one little group. Notorious scum, eh? President Joe Biden told allies Friday he was approving plans to train Ukrainian pilots on U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets. F-16 fighter jets. G7 summit, Canada announces new sanctions, more inflation for Canada against, because they can't, like they're not trying to replace the commodities they got sanctions on. It's a completely inappropriate maneuver to sacrifice everybody in the country for the military weapons maker to make a profit. Well, that's not supposed to be there. This was a swarm of insects. I got to remember to put that in my other pile. But they've never seen this one before. This was a swarm of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes. In China recently, they've never seen it before anywhere. This is the first time it's ever been recorded. And they don't know what's going on. China is right behind, is north of Fukushima. Nuclear meltdowns that's been going on for 12 years. And China's got a few of its own issues, but Fukushima has definitely contaminated China. Rising here as far as the eyes can see. And that's we're going to cover that again when we do what's going on worldwide with the species shows. The strange phenomenon stretched for more than 3 kilometers. Well, like normally they won't get that. You won't get that many because the migratory birds will come along at the right moment because they're meant to coincide, right? And the predators, whether it was be frogs or whatever the case may be, there would normally be predators who would keep stuff like that in check, and this is why it's a phenomenon that they've never seen before. But we're not supposed to be doing that until the show on species that we do pretty regularly, randomly, I should say. BEEAH Group and Atkins unite to tackle radioactive waste from nuclear facilities. Wow, 80 years later, they're like, oh shit, there's nuclear waste. We can make a few bucks here. Well, it turns out there's a shitload of companies and they make absurd monies. Hanford is a prime example, right? But they don't get nothing done. Case in point was they spent $17 billion to build a facility to encase radiation liquids in glass, and so they can store it for millions of years, they say. The problem with the story was because of 177 tanks with 56 million gallons, was they dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil in the 50s and 60s, which is equal to 1.4 million tanks. And if they ever do get this facility up and running, when they turn it on, they can never go inside again. They got to hope it runs perfect, and then somebody got to decommission it, and they probably never even designed that into it. Government urged to not urge not to abandon nuclear power and net zero roadmap. And they always got that weird look on their face, don't they? Come on, I'm almost human. Look at me. Oh, it's Australia. There are some whack shit lunatics in the nuclear industry in Australia and Britain. Dana, you're in Canada. You should shut up. Well, that's true. Yes, you got a point. Canada's pretty bad, man. We got captured, but in the 60s, I think it was. Canada doesn't exist. It's nuclear Canada. Nuclear industry controls all the regulatory agencies, all the universities, all the medias, and all key positions in government. For quite a few decades now, they've assimilated into all of it. Australia should keep an open mind about the use of small modular reactors. Keep an open mind. That's an interesting way to phrase it, isn't it? It should not exist. What's the rush? Why all the whining and sniveling? What's the rush? They don't actually exist. The nuclear industry, they got to do that, right? Because they're desperate. The renewable industry's curb stomped them. And if people would just use geothermal, why would you use a small modular reactor that don't exist when you can use geothermal that does exist? And speaking of nuclear pledges $3 billion to build French reactors, Mox plant. So that's such a strange story, you know? Don't tell me they're building another Mox plant. Like, they got 500 security guards at La Hague in France. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. It don't really matter. Onwards, upwards. Hopefully. Sometimes if you refresh the page and stop it for loading, you can get the story. Quite a few times, actually. Sometimes you can't, but most times you actually can. Just reload the page halfway and stop it, and you can actually read the articles. Because when it's behind a paywall, you can still access it that way. Otherwise, you won't get very many people reading it, right? Many unsecured deposit uranium tailings on the steep and unstable mountain slopes around Milo Su, a former closed city. You need an entire city to produce genocide machines. Pose serious risk to the health of the local population and environment. In addition, groundwater contaminated by mining waste can pose a risk when used for drinking and irrigation. Can pose a risk. We covered a story yesterday with Savannah Riverside. They had 41 remediations at 14 underground aquifers spots on their massive site. They contaminated everything. Once your groundwater is contaminated, there's no way to get it back. The whole story is absurd. Because the Savannah River feeds just thousands and thousands of farmlands, same as the Columbia River with Hanford does. They're drawing water out of that. It's just a disgusting industry. Because radiation is so bad for so long, and they know what they're doing. They're not naive. About 2 million cubic meters, 2 million one-ton trucks. And 13 mining debris heaps total. This is Australia, which is all running into a major river. 2 major rivers. And a lot of these tailing ponds were damaged by landslides, mudslides, and floods and rose. Some in the high-risk area where major landslides are expected. Like they didn't know. Project will also finance the rehabilitation of contaminated land and water resources. You can't contaminate what you've already done for 50 years. It's just yanking more money, right? They got to be done, but they shouldn't be in charge of it. Like TEPCO shouldn't be running Fukushima. It's absurd that TEPCO doesn't even exist, of course, right? It's nationalized by the Japanese government. Should TEPCO be removed from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site and independent testing of the water tanks? How can that be a bad idea, huh? How can that be a bad idea? Don't worry about it. That's the wrong way. Specialist security officers use exclusive powers for the first time, escorting huge generators in the nuclear power plants. So, G4S, I think it is, now can do traffic on their own without bringing the police in. Who knows what they're cooking up by doing that? This is a precursor to something evil down the road, you can be sure. But now they can just hold up traffic whenever they feel like it. And remember, these things only travel at 4 or 5 miles per hour. So when they're trying to maneuver into places, it could be several hours delay. But it's really interesting that a private company is doing security for the nuclear industry and getting access to nuclear sites, nuclear equipment. It's very dubious. It's first on a UK company. Well, it's actually an Israeli company. A non-police service to gain accreditation to allow specialist security officers to stop and manage traffic as they escort moving abnormal, indivisible loads on the roads. Again, gonna be taking nuclear on that road again. Announcing a new album, Goliath. This is, so the biggest label for death metal is Nuclear Blast, the label, I think is Nuclear Blast. So we end up covering quite a lot of their artists that are meant to appeal to the metal heads. The skill to play the techniques that they're doing is amazing, by the way. I'll admit I have a collection of death metal. Is that the Hulk? Are they using the Hulk as a label picture or something under? Is that the Hulk or is that me? That definitely looks like the Hulk, but he's not green, but that looks like the Hulk. David and Goliath, but Goliath looks like the Hulk, right? Who knows? Goliath, that's right. The album via Nuclear Blast Records. And so Nuclear Blast magically got put on a pedestal, got the right people working there, and is the biggest. And so they get their name, that connotation out there all the time, Nuclear Blast, associated with music, which is the last thing you should be associating music with is nuclear. Unless it's anti-nuclear music, of course. IAEA, UK Atomic Energy Agency, launches a tritium training course. Tritium butt sniffing course. United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority, that's a laugh and a half. That's like a punchline for a real bad joke, right? Has launched a new tritium training course as part of its commitment to upskill the fusion industry that doesn't exist and won't exist for at least another 50,000 years by the looks of it. Why wouldn't you use geothermal? Why are you wasting shit on all the precious metal on the planet and all tens of thousands of scientists on fusion? And then, right, their justifications for it over the last couple of years are ridiculous. Like 2 years ago, they claimed that they got a major breakthrough. They got more power than they put in. And so he said, how much did you get? So it was equal to a 9-volt battery. What did you put in? Well, 300 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures. So how much water can you boil at that temperature that you're able to extrapolate that you got enough energy to power an extra 9-volt battery free? which the amount of power we're talking about is 1,000 times the power America uses in total for 300 plus million people in a thousandth of a second or something. It's 1,000 times the grid of the entire country to get the ignition, right? Which you have to do every, I don't know how many times a second, but it's a ridiculous amount. And you got to contain it in the biggest magnets ever produced. This is all just trying to prove theories on top of that. They're so far away from production, there's not a single human on the planet will be alive if it does come to fruition. Because they're lagging. Because they're hiring, the people they're hiring are the inbreeds of the inbreeds. You get a cushy job, don't got to do nothing, don't got to produce any results for the rest of your life. As long as your parents were super evil with the nuclear industry, well, get your cushy jobs. Managing, storing, and supplying tritium fuel. Managing, storing. Why don't you go down and scrape up all the stuff at Fukushima? Because there's lethal doses. That's why no nuclear scientists go there. And TEPCO allegedly took 20 nuclear scientists in there a couple of days ago. First time in 12 years. Showed them around, then announced that they're going to end the embargoes on food and fish in South Korea against Fukushima. That's it's bizarre anyway. First light fusion in UK. UK got a lot of these fly-by-night nuclear companies over the years we've covered. They last 1, 2, 3, 4 years and then they disappear. But they made a whole lot of people a whole lot of money from the taxpayers. Just robbed them of their hospitals and schools and infrastructure and pensions and everything else. What set nano-nuclear energy apart from other companies? Nano-nuclear energy is I like to say new skill, but I can't off the top of my head. Morning blend. We got the host. And she'll sell anything. Shit on the stick, you name her. She'll be happy to sell it for you. And so the two men there are part of the company. I'm not sure. I listened to it. I just didn't. James Wake, he's the CEO of Nano Nuclear Energy. So they were saying, we can have them everywhere. They can be everywhere. You need them everywhere because electric cars. We can put a nuclear reactor everywhere, all over the highways and shopping malls and parking lots and school parking lots. And he said, there's an enormous amount of opportunity, right, for small modular reactors. We can do the same thing with geothermal, by the way. But it's never going to come to fruition. There's so many of these fly-by-night companies, smaller, cheaper, safer. The Path to Zero, which was a paper by Miles Allen. There it is on the back of a truck, and you build it in factories. And well, it's not on a truck, that's a cartoon. Cartoons aren't real. Did anybody ever tell these people that? You don't have a design in. You're so far away, we can't even call you speculators. You don't got no history in the nuclear industry on top of that. But you found a channel, TV channel nobody knows nothing about, and you got put on a pedestal. Good for you. Way to go. Just arrogance. Yeah, my father was a scumbag pro-nuclear. His father was a scumbag pro-nuclear, and his pappy was a scumbag pro-nuclear, and his great pappy was a scumbag pro-nuclear scumbag. Oh, to be a pro-nuclear scumbag on Sugar Mountain with the neutrons and the beta decays. You can be gamma shine on Sugar Mountain. The nuclear force, what are the 4 fundamental forces in physics? What is it? Who cares? Go fix Fukushima first, moron. Actually, I do care about it. Like, if anybody's looking at my life, they're going, this guy is pathetic. All he reads is nuclear shit. The weak nuclear force might not sound like much, but you can thank it for everything from life-sustaining heat of the sun to the heavy atoms in your smartphone. The heavy. And so, everything is because of nuclear stories. I hate these people. So this is how they're going to promote nuclear fusion and everything else. Well, everything is from the atoms from the sun, which is true, right? But plutonium is not made by the sun. Right? The stuff from the chain reaction that we have are unique. We call them man-made. They're not from the sun. They don't, right? These principles are totally different. Everything with replicating cells is vulnerable to it. Right, because this is the Hadron Collider type stuff where they're smashing the atoms together and everybody's getting a pension and they can work for 50 years, don't have to produce a single thing. What role does the weak nuclear force play in nuclear decay? Well, see, if you crack these riddles, the industry is going to weaponize it against your future and humanity's future and the species' future. The government is not responsible enough in any shape or form to be entrusted with this kind of information. How do we blow Russia up and South Korea up with it? Let's get tens of thousands of public relation firms to get the population to acquiesce. How does the weak nuclear force help nuclear fusion in the sun? Again, you can't equate and conflate natural stuff with man-made anthropogenic stuff, okay? Who discovered the weak nuclear force? Well, it's like talking about who had the first chain reaction. It was Enrico Fermi, right? And so Enrico Fermi should be blamed for all the meltdowns, and any descendants he has should be sued for destroying humanity and all the species. What particles carry the weak nuclear force? I'm not going to go through it. I just don't have the heart. I don't have the heart to do it again. But it's pretty, it's important because you're talking about the atom. And you can't defeat this thing. Once you create it, you can't put the genie back in the bottle is the problem, right? And the more you learn about it, the more you start appreciating how evil this industry actually is. The Youth Leader Fund for a World Without Nuclear Weapons, fully funded study trip to Hiroshima and Nagasaki by Japanese. Now, you can imagine what kind of propaganda that's going to be. Let's go back to a nuclear bomb crater and we'll teach you stuff. We kept all the people back, rebuilt the city on the nuclear bomb crater. And then they studied the survivors now for 74 years, is it? Real life guinea pigs, right? With like Geraldine Thomas. If you listen to some of her presentations, I got more stomach than I do. I listen to most of them. And she was in charge of peer reviewing a lot of the studies, so they did see the light of day. But we've done entire presentations on it. And it's super interesting how much radiation studies actually exist that aren't acknowledged by the main, like the American academics, the British academics. Really, there should be war crimes tribunals for these people. Youth Leader Fund, so bringing children to the nuclear wasteland of Nagasaki, Hiroshima, to indoctrinate them is absurd, right? It's absurd, trust me. Bruce Power workers vote overwhelmingly here in Canada for favor of a strike at the nuclear plant. Bruce Power is the government nuclear power plant, basically. And union hasn't heard back from Bruce since April 25th. This was on the 19th of May. And a great big stupid disease factory. Now, I've done a presentation on the Canadian which is CANDU reactors. And let me see if I can find a little bit to entertain you. The numbers are nothing short of, my God. The whole problem with this story, though, is there's so many facets to the story. It's pretty hard to wrap your mind around it. Let me see if I can figure it. Well, let's do this. I can do a short way, do a long way. Tritium hazards, pollutions, radiation risk from the Canadian nuclear facilities. This is discharges that is considered acceptable. Down here, like UK is only allowed to release 8 terabecquerels a year, which is an absurd amount, by the way, of radiation into the environment. But they're only acknowledged in tritium. There's 1,000 other fission products, but they're only talking about tritium. A New Brunswick nuclear power plant in the Atlantic Ocean in Canada is releasing the most anywhere on the planet, and like more than some countries. It's legal each year, and they surpass it, you can be sure. Now this is liquid and vapor into the air at 1 trillion becquerels, so 16,400,000 trillion becquerels a year coming out of a single nuclear plant. In the United States, it's around 15 becquerels per liter, for instance, is illegal because you can't contain it, right? But the Canadian reactors we're talking, the intake water pipe, by the way, for Toronto and major cities, like all the major cities up there, well, the whole Toronto metropolitan, just millions of people. The water intake for it is right alongside of these nuclear power plants where they release the water into the Great Lakes. Quite a coincidence, isn't it? 16.4 million trillion versus 8 trillion for UK, for a size one. The Netherlands releasing 30 trillion legally a year. Germany at 70 trillion per site. Belgium at 100 trillion. Canada is 16.4, 17, 18, about 20 trillion, 20 million trillion becquerels a year, each year, and with a 12-year half-life. So 120-year half-life, but each day there's another massive amount. It's absurd numbers. And they're not satisfied. They're slaughtering everything and everybody and destroying all the water tables. They want more money. They'll get it. Yeah, no worries. They'll get it. They always get it. Demystifying the vortex rings and nuclear fusion and supernova is demystifying. They got no solution for nuclear waste, but they know all about the nuances light years away, right? That's important, but come up with solutions for humanity. Oh, we'll leave that to the slaves to figure it on their own. So these these contraptions that are running with nuclear, for instance, they're very specific. They got to be calculated properly. There's a whole protocol that using for each person, and it's all based on weight, and everything is calculated, and the beams and everything else. But it's common to have mistakes. It's so common to have mistakes. The numbers we're talking about are frightening. And when it comes to chemotherapy and stuff like that, well, the radioactive chemotherapy type, or so-called cancer treatments, the victim's got to go into a room that's what they call $1 million room, it's lead shield, so you don't radiate the people in the hallway. Your excrement has to go to a special waste site because it's so radioactive for so long. And we know cases where people left the hospital, they couldn't take the radiation treatment anymore, and they just walked out. And when they got home, they had one guy in particular had a leak outside his back window before he went in the house. And they came and dug up the soil because it was so radioactive. And typically, if you do reduce a tumor, over the next couple of months, multiple tumors shows up everywhere because you've been bombarded with radiation. That's what's her face in the middle there, the Green New Deal, right with, she's with Michael Schellenberg. Environmental progress, right? What was the headline again? Why is AOC parroting nuclear industry propaganda? Yeah, and that's exactly what they're doing. That's propaganda. The Green New Deal, the girl, and she got wearing a green jacket, lapel. During a visit to Japan, including to the destroyed, which is unusual, they used that word, Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant site, the U.S. representative, now we've covered this multiple times, Alexandria Cortez, made incredible statements about nuclear that she can't back up. That is completely dishonest. And to promote nuclear in America, there's no renaissance of nuclear in America. But the desperation you see in all these stories of the nuclear industry, right? When we do these particular types of shows where we cover the new, like a 24-hour so-called news cycle. Yeah, one thing I notice is always this desperation in the industry and the law. Every story is full of laws, and that's why it takes you so long to get through these stories, because the idea is just to point out how over the years, we've done tens of thousands of journalists over the years, we showed you tens of thousands of journalists, bald-faced lies about literally every facet of the story that they're talking about on nuclear. And the misrepresentation and the actual brainwashing. The amount of energy and time and effort they put into it is stunning, really. It's second to none. There's no other industry that has those specific attributes. I've never seen anything close to it. We got a poll, did I mention that tonight? Should TEPCO be removed from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site? And they don't like me when I'm doing polls like that. And independent testing of the water tanks. Well, that's a fun idea. I like that idea a lot, Danny. We should do that. South Korea sends 21 scumbags to Fukushima. And it's already a predetermined outcome. They're going to lift, now they say we can go ahead and lift the restrictions on fish. And because there are a lot of protests in the streets. And this has meant they want, because the industry wants to have a nuclear renaissance. Right, the current Prime Minister of South Korea is supporting nuclear industry. He wants a renaissance. He wants to build nuclear reactors worldwide, all of this ambition. The previous administration was phasing it out. He's only there for 4 years. When he's gone, the next administration will probably phase it out too. But remember, the nuclear industry unbelievably influenced throughout the medias, the universities. It's captured all the regulatory agencies. Concern over nuclear energy are legitimate. This is in Nature, by the way, of all places. They probably will never get to write another article. Reassurances from experts on the safety of nuclear power will not wash, says Colin Blah. The Fukushima crisis raised genuine questions. Since the disaster at the Fukushima plant in Japan, enthusiasm for a global nuclear revival has stalled. Well, there never really was one, was it? The nuclear experts who have popped up in the media, which is I showed you a bunch of them in a video earlier with Kathleen Higley, and the bunch of goblins were sat down with her, have been unconvincingly defensive, selective, condescending towards the public fear. Well, no, it's towards reality. There it is. This was a Canadian study done a couple of months ago. Well, not even that. A month and a half ago. The ghostly glow of a nuclear power station detected in pure water 150 miles away, and it was a quarter of a mile underground. A mile and a quarter, I think it was underground. Under kilometers of rocks, 150 miles away from a nuclear power plant, this pure water would catch the antineutrinos and light up, and would show up as like a little flash. And so you're talking about 150 miles away, beaming through kilometers of rock, and then showing, this is from a nuclear power plant. So they were able to determine whether a nuclear power plant was within 150 miles by using this technique. It was around a mile and a quarter underground of rock in northern Ontario 6 weeks ago. This is extraordinary. This is from a power plant. They say, well, then it's just an antineutrino, which is pure radiation, right? That's what these are. Because that's what when they. Never mind. How car industry legacy is propelling our shipbuilding. Again, you see submarine built by Adelaide firm will spend years longer in the ocean. Yeah, they scuttled a nuclear submarine, sank it with nuclear missiles and reactor cores. The Norwegian and the Russian scientists went down on an expedition where it sunk in the Arctic, where there's 18,000 dumps, by the way, from the Russians from nuclear, and claimed that it wouldn't decay for at least 1,000 years in the future. Now, there's no shipwreck in history in the ocean that doesn't decay, and certainly nothing out there currently that will last 1,000 years on the ocean floor. Well, it's being bombarded with neutrons and gamma-shons and X-rays and beta rays. And finally, parish councillor retires after 59 years of service, including a campaign to stop the dumping of nuclear waste in his village. 59 years. Well, we salute you, man. There's a bunch of them. But that's a pretty impressive story. They had a bunch of big wins. He said, in 1986, I suddenly found myself in the middle of Mrs. Thatcher's nuclear waste plans to bury 5 train loads of radioactive waste per week for 50 years on Fullbeck Airfield for 50 years. You know, at least the Americans just went ahead and dumped it in the soil and said, no, do something about it. and just walked away. And there was nobody to stop him, right? There was no logic saying, hey, come on, man, you can't dump. This is equivalent to a 6-foot wide aquarium, 518 feet tall, wrapped around the entire planet of nuclear waste. Hey, no, Dana, all the nuclear waste fits in a swimming pool, Dana, which is environmental progress, vicious misrepresentation of it. When in reality, just one single national laboratory, Hanford, there's many of them, by the way. EU new green reporting rules are impossible. Businesses say, oh yeah, they now label nuclear as green. There's like 540 votes to 560 said yes. But not a single person had a shred of evidence to prove that nuclear had any green attributes whatsoever. It can't have it. It's the most resource-intensive industry in history. And all nuclear power plants need 2 dedicated gas, oil, and coal plants just to run them. Russian officials claim a radioactive cloud is moving towards Western Europe. I forgot that story. I apologize. I should have showed that the same day I seen it. And I'm not sure what the hell that is, but that's an interesting statement. Increased radioactivity detected in Poland. Now, we covered a story a little while back where they blew up a munition dump. Not a dump, but a munitions holding site from United Kingdoms of the depleted uranium munitions. And the explosion itself looked like a nuclear weapon that went off. But like Monticello, a lot of things just get lost in the enormity of the propaganda that they're putting out. Those types of stories, though, I can't really... I should have been containing it. Russian military striking a shipment of ammunition containing depleted uranium, and the ammunition was reportedly supplied to Ukraine by the United Kingdom, which is, they sent them munitions, depleted uranium munitions, but then they sent them tanks, which needs 155 millimeter depleted uranium rounds, which is a 900 foot kill ratio. It's 3 football field kill ratio. And everything inside of it, by the way, gets turned into projectiles. It takes out city blocks, right? They're dull ram, depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material. The destruction of the ammunition has caused radioactive clouds to move towards the Western Europe. An increase in radiation has already been detected in Poland. In addition, they continue the U.S. development already using chemical, biological weapons, including in Ukraine, which is 100% true. They fired 5.5 million rounds a month in Afghanistan and Iraq for 9 years to get 10,000 Taliban. And killed millions missing, millions in refugee camps, millions unaccounted for, millions of orphans. They got rid of the pensions and the patents of the country. Monsanto was the only people that actually won, because you couldn't even grow their own seeds for 20 years. And Monsanto came in and set up shop immediately. Can we grow it in a nuclear wasteland? Well, here it is. Neutron bomb, we're almost through this, by the way. Neutron bomb premiere screening uranium film festival in Rio de Janeiro. Remember last year? The propaganda they were playing was horrific. They're supposed to be anti-nuclear, right? Film festival. Instead, it's all kinds of pro-nuclear scumbags down there feeding the victims, the gullibles, and the same propaganda they've been feeding everybody now for 80 years everywhere you go. It's pointless. I'll be looking for it. I haven't followed up on it. I'm supposed to dig that up and watch it. We abandoned nuclear power. Now Earth is paying the price. Salon. So for Salon, for the L, S-A-L, for L, they should use a hand with the finger, middle finger up, because that's what they think of you, right? That was another hideous propaganda story. I'm not going to do it to you. It's a really long one, too. And that was the last story. I just can't do it. It's the last story of the night, and I just don't have it in me to... Because I'll just flash through it, actually. I just can't walk through all of this right now. It'll take at least 30 minutes to get through it. I have a rebuttal for everything. That's why we have a proper rebuttal backed up by documentation for all of it. But I'm not going to cover that tonight. I'm not going to forget that they done it to us, because we've covered a lot of stories from talking about wind and solar. Did he say wind and solar? Or the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? Is that what it was? I can't remember. Can actually produce. Well, geothermal can produce it. Without rapid advancement in battery storage, well, you got wind. You got windmills that will pump air, compressors, and fill up tunnels. So you can power a whole city with compressed air storage. And that's all the windmill. Instead, like these big windmills, 300-foot blades on them. And all they do is, some of these are designed just to pump air, compress air. So it's pretty amazing, right? That's like a big, massive, wicked battery. And you can do it conventionally too, right? Use solar powers to run generators to compress air, and wind power and solar to compress air and store the energy for peak power, and pair it up with... Like, first off, you shouldn't do anything before you do geothermal. So you build a huge geothermal to be like your battery, then wind and solar and everything else alongside of it. But every time you hear them talking about, well, there's not enough batteries to power the city, or the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine all the time, so you got to have nuclear. These are low lifes, basically. And so I'm assuming, that's the end of it, I'm assuming that I got another so-called filter I can check tomorrow on the boat. I got to go out, when the tide's high tomorrow, I got to head out just before tide gets, because the tide's low tomorrow morning right away. So I got to wait for a little bit later in the day, which works out fine. And get out and scour really good and get a baseline. Because we're in the middle of migratory season, not a single bird to be seen. And the motor is reliable enough, but you can only travel at a really slow speed. And the kicker works, so that'll get me home in trouble. And you can't see any birds flying along on the ocean anyway. And fuel is pretty expensive, so it doesn't hurt to go slow. I'm just hyping myself up to go out and get the job done, right? It doesn't take a lot. Now that we got things back to semi-normal. But I actually had that running at 5,500 RPM on the way out. And I shot that in slow motion, unfortunately, so we couldn't even show it. And then, the boat's been Alaska 6 times, right? So you're going to have problems. But that's the first problems after all this time. Now, I've done everything brand new originally. And so this model shows, this is Norwegian Institute of Air Research, shows radiation covering the whole planet after 19.5 days. It never goes away, and everything you add is just bioaccumulation. Pulse and energy, every second at the speed of light. Gas, oil, and coal emissions don't pulse energy at the speed of light every second for millions of years. It grows flowers and trees and plants and animals and biota and insects and the millions of species. And you can't have, the planet would be like the moon if there was no carbon. The more carbon, the more life. And throughout history, like the dinosaur age, we had absurd more carbon than we do anywhere close to what we have right now. And that's it, I suppose. Let's call it night. What time is it? Probably nighttime anyway. Well, It's 2 hours, a little over 2 hours. That's a 24-hour news cycle show, right? And it takes you 2 hours just to run through as many lies as you can get through in 2 hours. And every day's the same thing, but it's really disappointing that you got thousands and thousands and thousands of journalists stabbing you in the back. Writing stories and producing videos on cat videos and doggy videos and drag it in the audience and then feed them propaganda like that. And that's what they're doing, right? It's done on purpose. And they all work to help each other, all the media. Like if something goes viral, all the media will stick it up on their sites too, right? To prop up the propaganda because it took off so much. And the world's waking up to it, and it's not working as much, but so they're working twice as hard with propaganda. That's what they do. There's no such thing as a media anymore. There's no such thing as a journalist. There's these creatures that insist on getting an education just to fuck with you. It's not an accident. Close the poll down. Wherever that's to. 18 people on the most important topic in human history. It's called censorship because they're gonna start dumping the water, and they don't want my narrative out there at all costs. They're desperate. They got no one to pick on top of that. There is nobody else out there running educational programs, unfortunately. Nobody's ever done it before, right? Hi, everybody. How's everybody? There we go. We got growth of radiation recorded in Poland after the destruction of the ammunition with depleted uranium in Ukraine. Wow. What was I just saying, folks? Should TEPCO be banned from Fukushima nuclear meltdown site, which is a very, very, very touchy subject? An independent testing of the water tanks, which is unbelievably sensitive subject. What did we have? 28 votes very early in the show, and we still only got 35, which is so great. I appreciate everybody participated. Everybody had a great night, great day tomorrow. Yeah, good night. Good night, Dana. Thank you for moderating. We appreciate it, man. Good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. I'm headed back out on the ocean tomorrow. We'll get a baseline of the birds. And this is day 4 now of me working again, right? So everything hurts. Literally, every muscle in my body hurts. Even today was a reasonable day compared to yesterday, for instance, or Saturday and Sunday. But still, everything hurts. So that's how you get rid of the pain, is some exercising. I need a little bit of exercise. That's it. The birds deserve somebody out there looking for them, right? I'll worry about what's going on with the motor for another day. But I am going to check for those filters tomorrow morning before, because we can't go until a little later in the day because it's low tide in the morning, right? Can't launch in the morning around here. Good night, everybody. Have a great night. A great day tomorrow. We'll get you up to date again tomorrow night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you made it this far. Take care. Yeah, good night, everybody. See everybody tomorrow night.